are both teachers, so it's a matter of family pride that I can get up and navigate a classroom and go back and forth. So they would be proud. My parents actually would be very proud that I know I'm in a real conservative office tonight. Because when I walk in, the fans are going, and the air conditioning vents are taped up. We are saving the election. I'm telling you, it's conservatism at its best. I'm so excited. My father would be so proud. When I grew up in Irving, and it was a capital punishment offense to touch the thermostat. If I went over and snuck over, and your dad won't notice if I just turn this down and said, "Ryan, what are you up?" Sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. We lived affordably. I was very blessed to grow up in a house where we had a roof over our heads and 3 square meals a day. I had my younger brother and younger sister, and I grew up, and it was a very loving household. Mom and Dad always provided for us and made sure that we were gonna get up and we were gonna know responsibility. We were going to take care of ourselves, take care of our families. That was a big part of it. And it was because of their guidance and their mentorship and their teaching and the good Lord's blessing that I got to go to school at A&M. I put myself through school, but I would not have gone if my dad had not said, "Son, that's where you need to go to school. That's a special place. And if you go there, it's going to mean special things for you in your life." And so I give a lot of credit to my parents for the opportunities that they allowed me to pursue. What I want to do tonight is talk for probably, an hour and 20 minutes.
Would you like to they wish to stay longer.
Talk for 10 minutes or so, and I'd like to do some question and answer after that. And that way we can talk about things that are important to you guys and in your community. Would it be okay if I take my jacket off? Is that bothering you? Okay. Once again, the teacher comes out at me, and I just can't stand talking next to it.
If you lose control, you need to write on the chalkboard.
If you had a whiteboard here, I'd be in the zone. Let me tell you a little bit more about my background and running for office a little bit, just to give you a frame of reference. So I grew up, as I said, in Irving, went to A&M, got out of school with a mechanical engineering degree, and went immediately into the oil business. My first job was with Oxy Petroleum, and then my second job was with Marathon. And then in 2006, my wife and I started our own company, and we have been very blessed. We got into a niche where we perform integrity analyses and do reliability programs for equipment used in the oil field, in refineries, and petrochemical plants, pressure vessels, piping systems, those sort of things. We make sure that they don't have leaks, they don't have failure. And so the companies obviously want reliability in their operations, and they've turned to us. We've grown like crazy. Today we have over 400 employees. We do business all over the world and in all segments of the industry. Geographically, we have operations all the way out to the Middle East. We're in Canada. We're in South America. Australia now. We've got some stuff starting in China. All over the United States, from Florida to California, New England area, and all over Texas. And I have literally traveled all over Texas prior to running for office, as my career has taken me there in the oil business. From El Paso to East Texas to Midland to Lubbock, all the way down to Corpus Christi and everywhere in between. And it has given me a real unique perspective as a political candidate about the strength of Texas energy. And let me talk about that just a little bit more. If you go back in history, and because the fact that the students I was just talking to was great, they asked some questions. Of course, one of them says, I said, "Do you know what the Railroad Commission does?" And of course, they knew right away that it was responsible primarily for railroads. I told them, we talked about that we don't do anything with railroads. And so they, "Well, why? What's that about? This sounds like just government stupidity." And I said, "Well, that's a very good assessment, but we're going to call it something else." I said, back in the 1890s, actually 1891 was when the Railroad Commission was formed by the state legislature, and it was to regulate railroads. A lot of new railroads were being built, and how they would be built, the use of eminent domain, was put under the charge of the Railroad Commission. By the early 1900s, 1910, the United States oil business was growing, and it was a convenient place to also put responsibility for that. And the first responsibility, the first responsibility that the Railroad Commission had for oil and gas was setting allowable levels. If you were a producer in the state of Texas, you were allowed to produce only a certain number of days per month. Now, why would they do that? Because at the time, we didn't have spot prices. There wasn't internet access to check the price of of oil and gas. And so people would just produce and produce and produce. And the price of oil and prices of gas would crash and fluctuate wildly. And it made a lot of instability inside the country, inside the state. And so the Railroad Commission began to set allowable levels to try and control production rates and therefore make for a more stable price. The Railroad Commission would, in effect, control oil prices from the early 1900s to about 1950. During that time, responsibility for railroads was moved away from the Railroad Commission to TxDOT, Texas Department of Transportation, who regulates railroads today. So we got to 1950, the Railroad Commission didn't do anything with trains anymore. It was entirely oil and gas, but the name has never been changed. And most people, 97% of Texans, have no idea that the Railroad Commission's primary job is to regulate oil and gas. Think about that for just a second. Put that in perspective. Most people would tell you that our state's most impactful industry, the biggest impact to our economy, comes from oil and gas, and 97% of Texans have no idea that there's a state agency that's regulating it. That's important. We'll come back to that in just a minute. We're talking about Texas regulating oil and gas production, and by 1970, Texas production would no longer be controlling the price of oil. We all know that would be taken over basically by OPEC. Because Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries realized as a bloc, if they lumped setting allowable levels, they could control oil prices. And by the middle of the 1970s, we saw the first oil embargo, and we saw President Carter get on national television, come on the radio, and tell the United States, we are in deep, deep trouble. We have allowed ourselves to become subject to the oil production of the Middle East, and they basically control our energy future. And we have to begin massive amounts of reduction of our use of oil. That was his message. And for the time, candidly, that might have been a good plan. But did you know today that energy plan put forth by Carter is still the energy plan that is in place today? No president since Carter has issued a revised energy plan. So here we are, a bunch of Texans, watching the biggest boom in Texas oil and gas in history. We're watching the world change around us as people in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and South America and Venezuela and Brazil are going, we've got to monitor what's going on in Texas. Because these guys are about to take over the world in energy. They're more aware of it than we are. The population of Brazil, as a percentage, knows more about what's going on at the Texas Railroad Commission than Texans do. And this is what I want to talk about today. You guys, like so many other clubs that are meeting tonight and other nights across the state of Texas, whether the Republican clubs, Tea Party activists, whatever, grassroots organizations, you guys are the backbone of a network of communication that happens inside the Republican Party and inside grassroots politics. And it's a time when that is going to be more crucial, I think, than any time in modern history, as we need to talk about the opportunities in oil and gas. Right now, something game-changing is going on in Denton, Texas. Is anyone following this? Is anyone aware of what's going on in Denton? So the city of Denton is trying to pass a moratorium on fracking. Normally, we'd say, well, who cares what the city of Denton does with its 275 wells? That is inconsequential in terms of state and national oil production. But the problem is, this is a slippery slope. You know, we talk a lot in the Republican Party because we believe so strongly in landowner rights. We believe in the opportunity of every individual, an opportunity that's granted by God and protected by the Constitution, to use his natural resources and use his property as he sees best. And we talk a lot about local control because we like the idea. We are comfortable, we are confident with the idea that as a local body, we can have a bigger impact in what happens to control our access to local property. But I will submit to you that a local city council can take a person's property rights just as easily and just as offensively as a state government, federal government, or international organization. And that city council, by the way, I believe is acting in what they believe is the best interest because their population is confused. They're getting lots of screams and hollers from the citizens of Denton to limit the use of this technology because the people in the city of Denton don't know. They just don't know. They believe, and a lot of people do, and I did numbers of town halls during the campaign, and I had one woman ask me, bless her heart, she said, sir, I have no idea what fracking is. Can you explain it to me? And bless her, yes, she didn't. I could tell she was talking, you know what she pictured when we talked about frack? She pictures the Grand Canyon opening and oil bubbling up from the ground. And that is not what's going on. We're drilling down thousands and thousands of feet and finding existing micro fissures where oil is trapped between two rocks, basically. And we are microscopically separating these things and leaving grains of sand in between those rocks to allow the oil to flow out. But people don't know that. They don't know what's going on in these operations, and so they're concerned. And they're asking their city council to take action. And the shame of it is, or the disappointment of it is, that the Railroad Commission has not gone into Denton and given those citizens confidence in what we're doing. And that's an opportunity to improve. And that's the exact type of thing that I want to try to do. I tell people as I talk around the state, I say, you know, I'm a very conservative person. The ideals that we hold dear in the Republican Party and the conservative movement are the same ideals that we grew up with. When my dad would take over the air vents to keep the electricity prices down, we were living those conservative principles. It was financial responsibility and limited spending by the government. It's our Second Amendment rights, which are crucial to ensuring that our freedom is maintained. It's protection of life and protection of the unborn. The same thing, and a myriad of other principles that we live by. But I will tell you that none of those things are what qualify me to ask for your vote to be your railroad commissioner. It's the 20 years of experience that I have in the oil and gas business, and the fact that I will be the first engineer to serve as a railroad commissioner in 50 years. As we go forward and our oil and gas business grows, and we begin to change the world, because we're going to give the state of Texas and our production, our economy, our innovation, the power of impact over oil and gas prices like we had 100 years ago. Not because the government regulates it, just because our companies, our citizens, and our workers are second to none around the world. We're going to play the role in oil and gas that we should. And we're going to make sure that that's done because the people of Texas are confident in this industry. They're confident in what's going on around. They're excited about the opportunities that all of this development gives to everybody in this state. And it's our job to go do that. And that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that when people have questions, they have concerns, that they call me. Call me personally and ask about what's happening. Because that's the ability and the experience I bring to the table that I want to put to use. So, what I'm going to ask you guys to do tonight, the action I want you to take is to use your grassroots network. Because a lot of your friends, a lot of your acquaintances that may be very conservative, very business, very pro-business, very strong energy supporters, do not know what the Railroad Commission's doing, do not know about the opportunities around us. And I'm going to ask you to help spread that word. Tell your friends over dinner, hey, do you know what's going on in Texas? Did you know over the last 6 years the United States has lowered our import of oil from 60% of the oil we use down to below 40%? In that same time, the state of Texas has almost tripled its oil production. 2/3 of that 40% is straight out of Texas. We are leading this nation to not just energy independence, but energy dominance right here in Texas. This is huge. People aren't aware of it. So as you guys sit down, talk with your friends, talk with your family, spread the word on it. Talk about what's going on. Did you know the Railroad Commission does this stuff? Did you know there's this really excited engineer? Man, he's a geek, he's into this stuff. You should reach out to him, and you should check this guy out. I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat, socialist, communist, I don't care. Whether you don't vote at all. I want you to be excited about what's going on in this industry and in this state. And that's my job and I'm going to do. So I'm going to ask you guys for that help. Stay connected with our campaign as we're putting out information that is very technically based, that's about the opportunities in the economy. Help us spread that out there. It's going to be powerful, and the role that you guys can play this week. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions you guys have. And just like I told the 5 kids sitting here, 6 kids sitting here, there is no question that's off limits. Seriously, there's nothing that you need to feel like I can't ask this question, whether it's personal, professional, political, I don't care. So, yes, sir.
We keep hearing about how there hasn't been a refinery in this country built since 1976. And number one, is that really a concern, or is that, what can be done about it if it is a concern?
That's a great question. Now, the Railroad Commission does nothing with refineries, so I'm not going to answer it. No, I'm just kidding. And I can answer this because I am a gigantic dork and I love this stuff. I actually read books. When everyone goes home and reads, the Hunger Games, I'm reading energy policy books, believe it or not. I know, it's depressing. The last refinery built in the United States was built in 1979. There was actually 2 of them built right at the same time. one that is now the Marathon Refinery in Garyville, Louisiana, and one that is the Valero Refinery in Corpus Christi, were both started in the late 70s. Interestingly enough, in the country today, there's about 140 refineries. There's some gray area there. There's some really small plants, but there's about 140. And like I said, the last ones were started in 1970. What's interesting is, you go back in history, at one point in the United States, there was almost 300 refineries. So the natural conclusion is, oh, so we are down to half of our refining capacity. Because at its peak, in the 1940s and 50s, there were 300 refineries. Actually, our refining capacity today, with 140 refineries, is higher than it was when we had 300. Because even though there hasn't been a new refinery built, the refineries we do have are the large-scale major ones that are continuously expanding. Marathon's Garyville Refinery, which is one of the newest ones, expanded its capacity just 4 years ago, by over 150,000 barrels a day. So they went from 300,000 barrels a day to 450,000 barrels a day. And that expansion made that expansion amount was bigger than about half the refineries in the country. So we are expanding. Now the question is this a concern? And I will tell you that it is, but not in the way you may think. We have sufficient refining capacity in this country to provide for the fuel needs, the diesel, the gasoline, the kerosene, the jet fuel, that we're going to need in this country for a long time. So just in order to supply our own needs is not a concern. But here is the concern. We have an opportunity right now with our lower prices that we have on oil because of the production we have, and the very low prices in natural gas, for the United States to become a refined product exporter. We can make a lot of money and have a big impact on our national trade deficit by selling more and more refined products overseas. In Europe, they use diesel a lot more than they use petrol, as they call it, or gasoline, as we call it. And so we have an opportunity to make tons and tons of diesel, sell it into Europe at a premium. And that returns a lot of dollars of value back into the state of Texas. So not just Texas, the United States. So yes, we do need to have the capability to either expand or add more refineries to continue to strengthen that position. And that is going to be predominantly a federal government issue. Because the EPA are the ones who have to pass the air permits or process the air permits to build new refineries. Good question. Yes, ma'am?
How do you answer people that talk about does fracking cause earthquakes or what's the...
Good question. So we hear a lot of that right now. This is somewhat driving what's going on in Denton. Is this fracking thing causing earthquakes, right? Once again, we picture the Grand Canyon opening up when I did this frack job, and that's a real concern. People should be able to ask that question. Should we be concerned about this? A couple things real quick. In the United States, we've executed it's like 1.4 million frack jobs. So you think of all the wells out there that did frack, and what fracking is basically a completion technique. So you drill the well, you put in whatever lateral you want, you go down and you execute a frack job. Almost 1.5 or 1.4 million of those have gone on. In that time, we have exactly 0 cases where it has been positively demonstrated that frack job caused contamination of a water source. That's the big one that most people are concerned about. Now, why is that? Because a lot of what we call these resource plays are happening at 8, 9, 12,000 feet below the ground. Any of you guys have a water well on your property? How deep does your water well go? About 450 feet. So you're talking thousands of feet difference between the aquifer that we are processing water out of and where this frack job occurs. But that's not just it. All of the safety techniques and the programs that are put in place to ensure that frack job does not permeate outside that resource is very extensive. It's very high tech. So we don't have any evidence of that. Now, earthquakes is the new one. And there was a paper that was put out in Oklahoma about 3 years ago that got a lot of attention. A scientist up there put out a paper saying, I believe that I have connected fracking to earthquakes. And there's a process, and forgive me, I'm going to pull out my dork card here. A process called peer review. Anybody out there can claim, I've come up with this conclusion. I have determined that buildings should be built on old textbooks. And that would be by far the best thing for buildings to be built on. And until that is peer-reviewed, people don't accept that it is good principle. So other people who are experts in building construction have to review that. The paper that was put out in Oklahoma, at the time that it got a lot of review from the press, had not been peer-reviewed. Since that time, it has been peer-reviewed, and essentially the scientists that looked at it said there were several very big and somewhat bogus assumptions. So we don't believe that your logic is sound. So we still, as far as I'm aware, I'm doing a lot of research, I certainly haven't seen it all. I'm still unaware of any actual scientific evidence or any principle, any paper, any study that has actually linked an earthquake to a frac job. Now up in Azle, and I know this is so boring, I'm sorry. In Azle, the assumption or the supposition is that they're linking it to injection wells. Now injection wells have a little bit different story on them because out in California, they were going to use injection wells to intentionally stimulate earthquakes. If you ever want a really quick summary here, land masses are shifting all the time, and those don't cause earthquakes. What happens is when those land masses bind up on each other and can't move, and the stresses build up, and eventually, boom, that's when the earthquake occurs. So the California theory was, you know what I ought to do is to keep them from breaking loose suddenly, I'll go down and inject a bunch of water and allow them to slide more easily. And even though I might cause a little earthquake, it'll keep it from being a big earthquake. So that is the theory that's playing out in Azle, and the theory that maybe those injection wells are caused, which are a totally different type of injection well, but still it is a injection well, might be causing earthquakes. We still have not seen any definitive scientific research. There are two different groups studying that, and I'm hoping that we're going to see real data, real information over the next year that will help us understand if this is occurring. And if not, then we know that too. And either way, it's a job as a railroad commissioner to put that information out in front of people. And if, by the way, injection wells are causing earthquakes, then it's my job to do something about it. And figure out how do we handle that in a way that is scientifically sound, but doesn't denigrate the entire industry because of one area. That was a very long answer. I'm sure people have a hard time being like, oh, no, he says correct.
I haven't seen any sleeping faces, except the ones you're trying to make while standing.
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm going to make some positive comments here, okay?
Okay.
When you're elected in November, you want to serve a 4-year term, correct?
Well, I hope to serve a 6-year term. That's the term I'm elected to. So
Okay.
it's 4 years now. We're going to get down.
That's even better.
That's better. So let's knock on wood.
So you will be in office in 2017 when we have a Republican president that passes the Keystone Pipeline. So you will be in office when we get that Keystone Pipeline. My question is the right-of-way already there for this Keystone, and where will it terminate down on the coast?
Okay.
I'm sure you can.
Oh, yeah, I can give you a very exact answer. The right-of-way is not only already identified, the pipeline's already built. The section of the Keystone Pipeline is going to run from Cushing, Oklahoma, which is basically the termination point for contracts. I'll get into too much detail. Cushing, Oklahoma, which is a major sort of intersection of oil and gas transfers. From there to not Mont Belvieu, Port Arthur area. Port Arthur, Mont Belvieu out in East Texas, so southeast Texas along the coast. That's where that pipeline terminates, and it's already been built. The part that we need to have constructed is the part that runs through the northern part of the United States from Canada into basically down to Cushing. And some of that pipeline's built too, but there's big sections that are not completed yet. And of course, the crucial section is the part that comes from Canada into the United States. It's not built either.
And we're set on governor in Texas.
We're ready. Now let me, boy, if you really want to get me worked up, more than I already am, let's talk about the Keystone Pipeline for a second. Let me give you some interesting anecdotes about why the Keystone Pipeline is important. And we all know it's important because we say, well, I want to buy oil from people that are friends, not from people that don't like us. And if you look at the amount of oil, look at the amount of oil that we bring. Everyone can see this pie chart? Right? This pie chart says the countries that we get oil from. 60% of our oil, roughly, comes from right here in the United States. The next biggest chunk actually already comes from Canada. 11% of the oil that we import comes from Canada. The next biggest chunk is Mexico. The next biggest chunk after that is Saudi Arabia, then Venezuela, then Russia. Those are the top 5. And they're getting into a pretty small percentage. We get about 2% of our imports from Russia. It's not a big number in terms of our imports. Why this is important is not just about getting off of, say, Saudi Arabian oil. It is the price differential on oil. So go with me on this for just a second, and you'll know how cool this can be. West Texas Intermediate is a light sweet crude. What light sweet crude means is that it's got relatively short hydrocarbon molecules, and there's not a lot of sulfur in it. Having very long hydrocarbon molecules and having a lot of sulfur makes oil very expensive and difficult to process. So light sweet crude is a more valuable crude. And usually, West Texas Intermediate trades at a premium. I don't know what it is, they haven't checked it in about a week, but the last time I checked, West Texas Intermediate was trading at about $105 a barrel. Now,
Down to 99.
is it 99? Okay. Now, my guess is Brent, which is the international equivalent standard crude. We talk about crude prices. We don't only talk about West Texas Intermediate or Brent. Brent trades at about a $5 addition. So if it's at $99 a barrel, my guess is Brent's at about $104 a barrel. We don't talk a lot about Canadian crudes. Western Canadian Select is the most normally used Canadian benchmark crude. And today it's probably trading, my guess is at around $90 a barrel, or about $10 cheaper than West Texas Intermediate. If we could get the West Texas Intermediate out of the state of Texas, and we could bring the Western Canadian Select in to the state of Texas, that differential could grow. We've seen it as big as $30 a barrel. So it's at $10 today, it could be $30. Imagine the advantage that we would have here in Texas if I was bringing in that heavy sour crude, that cheap stuff, and refining it in our refineries that have been engineered over the last 25 years to run it, and sell our more valuable crude into countries like China and India who don't have the refining capability to process it. Not only would we have a big gasoline price advantage here, we'd be controlling more overseas the prices of lighter sweet crude. Two big things would happen if we can get that pipeline built. That's why it's so important. Now, it kind of spooks some people. Like, wait. I don't want you to export our crude, because why should we give other people our crude and we got to hold on? I get that. I totally do. But if I can bring in the cheaper crude and sell our more expensive crude, that differential at $30 a barrel can be big, have a huge impact to the state of Texas. That's why the Canadian pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline is so important.
And in the meantime, it's being trucked from Canada to the head of the pipeline. So
Not only is it's not only being trucked from Canada down that pipeline, it's being trucked from Canada everywhere.
Yeah. It's on rail.
So they're, do what?
It's on rail.
Yeah, it's on rail, it's everywhere. It's being sent all over the place. We want to get,
one law of those truckloads.
yes, there you go. Yes, sir.
One thing back to the refinery point about domestic U.S. refineries. A lot of people are not aware that not all of those refineries are U.S. owned. Back in the 80s, the Venezuelan National Oil Company, the government oil company, PDVSA, bought Sitton Petroleum and the refinery in Lake Charles. It's a big refinery, and converted it to process the sour crude you talked about.
Yep, that's true. In fact, Sitco owns 3 refineries in the United States. They went in Corpus Christi and one.
Right.
In fact, there's another one. There's Petrobras, the Brazilian oil company, owns a refinery in the Houston area that's called Pasadena Refining System. It is an interesting dynamic on foreign investment in refineries. And to be quite frank, I don't have a position on it that I could give you that I think is really, really powerful. In other words, hey, this is exactly what we need to do. On the one hand, I don't like the idea of foreign companies owning our refineries, right? At the same time, I believe in free market. And I believe that having foreign investment here can be a good thing. Why not leverage somebody else's dollars to bring them here and allow us to build our infrastructure on them? At the end of the day, they're not. If they said, we're going to shut that refinery down because we just really don't like you guys, how do they actually force that to happen? Right? I mean, it's not like they're going to send their military in here to shut that refinery down. So it's a complicated issue, but it is one that you're right. A lot of people are aware of. Was there something else? Yes.
A couple points. I was in that Denton City Council meeting at midnight.
I was too.
And they had that deal going, and they passed that on. I mean, this is
It's on the November ballot.
a typical government reaction. Well, we don't want to deal with this. We're going to let people deal with it. But people have no clue what's going on in hydraulic fracturing.
Right.
As you earlier said.
Right.
And the other thing, recently I was in Vancouver, and the Canadians tell me they're building theirs to the west coast so they can ship it over to China.
Oh yeah.
Because of the
Right.
pipeline problems here in this country.
Right. Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's not in their interest to do that because the Chinese market for crude oil is not near as stable. Because it's all controlled by just the government. They can decide anytime what they're going to do, whereas U.S. price, because it's free market, is actually much more stable. So it's not in their interest to do that, but they can't sit around waiting forever for the Secretary of State to issue the permit. I actually am hopeful that it's not going to take a Republican president to get this done. I think what we have to do, people ask me, and for those who are at the convention, I talk about some of the things I want to accomplish as a railroad commissioner. And I talked already about really giving the citizens of the state of Texas confidence in what we're doing. That's certainly a big one. And part of that comes from the commission operating more effectively as an agency, as a service agency, using technology and business processes. But another one that's just outside of the railroad commissions, I think we ought to establish a state energy plan, state energy policy. One in which we don't talk about government subsidies or mandates. We're simply saying, look, here is the opportunity for the companies in the state of Texas, and even in the United States, to compete on a national and on a global scale. And if we just don't get it, if we just get out of the way, and where necessary, put in place the right policies, the right regulations, we can really make sure that we are on the cutting edge. And we're going to, hey, think about it this way. Who is impacted the most? Who is negatively impacted the most by $6 and $7 gasoline? It's not the rich oil guys, it's poor people. It's people that struggle to drive to work every day, or who are unemployed, or trying to make sure they got, those guys driving their cars at $6 and $7 gasoline, it impacts them the most. So we need to have good, stable energy in this country. And I think if we can advocate that as in a state energy plan, my hope is that we give the federal government almost no choice but to follow our lead. Wow, that's a really good plan. We look like morons if we don't go along with it. It's a hope, and it's an optimistic hope, but it's one that I want to pursue.
They already look like
Well, apparently not to enough people.
So based on the unemployment rate in North Dakota and Texas, you'd think they'd be following
You would.
the plan now.
But no one has
And
connected
Pennsylvania.
those dots for people like California yet. So we still got to do it. What else? Yes, sir.
Can you please, when you get elected, be on MSNBC, all the channels, telling the truth about Keystone Pipeline? I've heard over and over from the liberals and the writers, the speakers, that not one barrel of that is it's all gonna go straight overseas. That none of it's coming here. And please, if you can articulate how it's gonna benefit Texas and this country, and that is all just something they made up. That one of those defense funds and all that, I mean, the guy said the same thing. We're not gonna see a barrel of it in this country. So we're just doing the bidding for the oil companies.
Yeah.
You know, that's all this is for the rich oil companies, and it's not gonna help us.
He won't get invited back the first time he tells them the truth.
I was going to say, unfortunately, MSNBC doesn't check with me on the program lineup, so I don't know how much I can affect
Well,
that.
but you go on Fox, and you go on Fox and the other channels that will, because you have a really good way of articulating, and you believe what you're saying. You're not reading off a 3x5. So,
Well, thank you. I'll do my best. That's my plan. Yeah. Anything else?
Would this result most of our funding in our schools too?
I'm sorry, what?
Would this result most of our funding in our schools? If we get $130 a barrel for our premium crude here, that's gonna put a ton of money in our state coffers.
It already is doing that.
Well, I realize that, but it's gonna be even that much more.
It is. We're bringing so many dollars into state coffers right now that it's. So I don't know if you know what's the stabilization fund is funded something like 90% by basically oil and gas severance fees, oil and gas severance taxes, and it's gotten so big that they don't know what to do with it. And so it's going to continue to grow, and there's talks of how the government saying, how can I leverage this to use in other places, reduce taxes, those sort of things. So you're absolutely right. It's kind of a massively positive impact on state government. Is there something else?
Is it still, once upon a time, it was true that the state of Texas itself was the largest royalty owner in the country. Is that still true?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. My guess is yes, because you look at things like the Permanent University Fund, other things around the state, but I don't know that off the top of my head. So, yeah. So I very likely true, but I don't want to answer that without knowing for sure that it's right. But I'm getting when he stands up, that's the like invisible hook that I'm getting. I know you guys have a lot. I know, right?
Ignore me, that's fine. As long as everybody's happy, I'm good.
Is there anything else? Anything last before I wrap up? Well, as I said, I love that you guys are taking the time to come out tonight, are willing to let me talk to you for so long. Really, I hope that you'll stay in touch with us, and thank you so much for inviting me and make sure we got out here. Thank you. us. If you got Facebook, connect with on Facebook. Go online. Put your email address in, because we are going to send out updates that are very technically based, talk about what's going on, so that people know what's happening. And I'd love to stay connected with all of you. So thank you so much.
This is a thank you for you,
Well, thank you.
and a little thank you for your wife. Since you're eyelash, you can.
Man, that is she is a big cut, but she's in a lot of recipes and all that stuff.
Thank you so
Well,
much
thanks
for
for y'all.
coming.
Thanks for having me. What?
The cookbook's best with a little ketchup on it.
Yeah. It's in there. It's in there.
Now, we expect you back after you're elected.
97.
My son's class in ninth grade.
Okay.
We appreciate,
We expect you back after you're elected.
I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. And I think you guys are.
you're on your way to Houston,
We are.
so we're gonna excuse him and his,
Thank Mike, his
Yep, Mike.
scheduler.
So we will not so subtly sneak out while you guys carry on with party business, if that's okay.
yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right,
Mike.
thanks. It's good to see you. Thanks.
Hey, that was great. Appreciate that. We're gonna have to have more of that. Anybody has any connections with